place for you, and we're glad you're here. Join me in looking around the room at the people wearing white shirts and red bandanas. They are our greeters and helpers, and also important members of our launch team who helped to make this day happen. If you need directions to the bathroom, or if you're an adult and you want to not ask your question on the microphone, we have 3x5 cards that you can write your question down for the author, and we'll ask them for you. After the reading and the interview, kids get to ask their questions first. And Shelley Scamra, who is a member of our launch team and a fourth grade teacher extraordinaire, will be manning the microphone. Kids will be invited to take turns coming up to the mic to ask their questions. And after the kids, if there's any time left, we adults will get to ask our questions too. Bard's Alley Bookstore in Vienna is our book-selling partner, and we're grateful for their support and help. Church Street in Vienna is the historic district of town and a great place to wander and spend an afternoon. Amy Woolsey from Bard's Alley is here today to sell books, and you can purchase a copy of Freewater and get your book signed. From the very beginning of the creation of Crooked Steeple Literary Festival, Ann Mugler and I wanted to include kids and young adults in our reading community. And when we heard about Freewater, we both knew that this was the book we wanted to start with. It's beautiful and fascinating and a great read for all ages. Amina Luqman-Dawson received the Newbery Medal and the Coretta Scott King Award for Freewater. She also wrote the pictorial history book, Images of America, African Americans of Petersburg, as well as numerous articles and op-ed pieces. She and her husband and son live in Arlington, Virginia, and we're so honored to have you here today, Amina. Carlin Schwartz is our interviewer for today. She and her mother, I'm not sure whether it was you or your mother, that told us about Freewater. As a longtime reading specialist in the Arlington Public Schools, we now know she knows about great books. Carlin is also an important part of our community at Falls Church Presbyterian as a godly place storyteller. Please join me in welcoming Amina Luqman-Dawson and Carlin Schwartz to the Crooked Steep stage.
Thank you so much, Myra. I, for one, am super excited to be here. I've had the privilege of just getting to spend some time with Amina and her husband, Robert, and I hope that you will... Is your house up? I thought so. You want me to try again?
Can you hear me?
Now maybe it's on. Okay.
Oh.
I'm just loud. I thought that I was loud enough. So I've had the pleasure of getting to know Amina and her husband Robert a little bit, and I hope that you enjoy your time with Amina as much as I have, and we're going to just dive right into the interview. So Amina, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about Freewater to get us started.
Absolutely. First, thank you so much for having me, and I'm so happy to see all you young people here. That is like just a treat. That was the dream as I wrote this book, is that one day I'd have a space to be able to come and speak with young people. So thanks for being here. So Freewater. Freewater is a historical novel, and it takes place during the antebellum South, and it's two children that escape enslavement, and they find themselves deep in a swamp where they discover the hidden community called Freewater. And it's a maroon community, and these are other folks who have been enslaved, who have managed to escape and find ways to live free yet clandestinely in the swamp. Now Homer, my protagonist, and his sister Ada, they learn what it's like to be free. They learn what that feels like, and they learn once they get that feeling, like, oh, what do we want to do with it? And they decide to hatch a most extraordinary plan to rescue their mother from enslavement. And so they decide to return to the plantation they escaped from to get her and let the adventure begin.
So why don't you kick us off with a passage that's particularly important to you, or one you like, or one you think that people might connect to from Freewater.
Okay, excellent. I have chosen, it's always hard for me to pick something, But I decided to pick a moment when Homer and Ada they've escaped, and they're on the run, and they come across this most amazing person called Suleiman. Now, Suleiman, I see him as my superhero. He is a marauder. He is a person who lives in the swamp. He doesn't live in Freewater, the maroon community. He lives in the swamp, and he actually steals from plantations and brings those things back to the swamp to help people who live there. And this is actually based on true history. They called them fugitive enslaved people who would escape, and because it's hard to live out in nature, they would go back and they would get things. And so he's my superhero because he knows how to get in there and get things from plantations, and he also knows how to escape plantations. So he meets up with Ada and Homer, and he kind of helps them. He helps save them to get them to Freewater. And here's when they first meet him. And he goes, he's scared off Stokes. Now, Stokes was the person who was the overseer at the plantation who was chasing them. And so he's like, he's scared off Stokes, breathed Ada. No one scared Stokes. It was Stokes' job to do the scaring. But the flying man was unconcerned with what he'd done. Instead, he came down from that tree, tied his long locked hair in a knot, pulled a small axe from his pouch, and started cutting a path through the plants, heading deeper into the tangled thicket. He turned back, seeing that we weren't being followed. How'd you learn how to do that? Ada asked after him. Who are you? I asked. What are you doing in this here swamp? He shook his head and kept hacking away. Then he stopped, and for the first time he stared right at me. A chill ran down my spine. He saw me. None of those things are good questions, he said. Here are some good questions. Can you spot bear tracks in mud? Do you know how to keep snakes off of you at night? Do you know how to hunt? He doesn't know any of those things, chimed in Ada. Hush up, I said, knowing she was right. Well, you don't, insisted Ada. Then you best follow me, said the man, and he went right back to his hacking. Follow you where? Who knew where this man would take us? If Stokes had found us, as soon as Mama got away, she could too. Staying meant we'd be here when Mama came for us. This was all too much to explain to this snake-shooting, fire-starting man, and even harder to explain to Ada. Well, we might as well go on, said Ada, and off she went, running behind him. Ada, I called, and I saw the man's head bobbing up and down in the bush, and right before he went out of sight, he said, Suleiman, my name is Suleiman. Just want to read that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now that we've heard a little bit from Freewater and a little bit about Freewater, can you tell us what inspired you to write this book about this subject for this audience?
Well, this for me, when I was your age, there's young folks here, when I was small, I found this topic to be really difficult. Back in those days, at least, there was a mini-series that they'd show on television each year called Roots, and I very much am appreciative that Roots as a mini-series existed. I think there would be no Freewater had there been no Roots. But for me as a child watching that, I remember feeling just so very scared by it. And I remember going and running from the room into my mother's closet and hiding there, feeling as though the people in the screen might jump out and maybe pull me back into that time. And I got a lot from that. One of the things I got from it was this feeling of just a fear and dread about the topic. And what it did was I felt like it maybe sort of separated me from the history. It made me want to avoid it, made me want to find other things that weren't quite so difficult. And I think as a community, we tend to have similar responses to it. And so I wrote this book in some ways for my son, who I wrote it for. My son was actually quite young when I really got into writing this, and I hoped to write it and read it to him. Unfortunately, it took me 10 years to write it, so he was too old. He was like, Mom, you are not reading this book to me. No. And so, but I envisioned reading this story to him and him hearing about maroons and hearing about this unique little aspect, this cool bit of history that might make him better connect to this difficult history. And then I thought, oh, maybe a bunch of other folks could have that same experience where they read it and they felt, oh, here's a new bit of ground on which to talk about this difficult bit of history.
Thank you. So what was the process of writing this book like? You said it took 10 years to write, but you certainly probably got the ideas before that.
I
so
did.
Like from the beginnings of the ruminations around it to the publication, what was that like?
That's a good question. I'll try to keep it short because the beginning of it was in 2002. 2002 is when I wrote the very first chapters in Freewater, which I shudder to think now we're 2025. It took me, and so imagine at that time, I'm a lucky person in that the idea for this book hit me like a bolt of lightning. I saw it immediately. To these two children escaping, going into the wilderness, and they discover this maroon community. And I ran to the library in 2002, and I found what I could on maroons, and I even wrote a couple of chapters. But imagine at that time, I had never written anything fictional, like anything. And so I remember thinking, Amina, what are you doing? You do not know what you are doing. You have no idea what you're doing. And I studied public policy. I would write things like that. And so those thoughts were so big in my mind that I decided to stop writing altogether. So I put it down for a short 10 years. 10 years. No, seriously, like did not touch it, forgot about it. But then I became a mom. And as a mom, I had that thought, how can I share it? So I brought it out again, and I said, you know what, I'm going to start researching this a little more. And I'm lucky because I lived we live, gosh, I say this story usually when I'm traveling. We live not far from the Smithsonian, not far from the Library of Congress, not far from some of the best research places. And it happens so we live not far from one of the best researchers of the Great Dismal Swamp. This story is loosely based on enslaved people who ran and found refuge in the Great Dismal Swamp. We live in Virginia. It's in Virginia, right on the border of Virginia and North Carolina. So I started writing, and it was arduous. And I think I've rewritten this book, I always say at least 20 times. Imagine the very first time I wrote it, there was no Homer and Ada. Even though I visually envisioned these two kids escaping, I had never written dialogue. So I said, well, maybe let's just have one kid, so then they don't have to say anything to each other. And so I nixed the idea of having a sibling, and I wrote the whole book with just Homer. And then I got to the end, and I started reading it to my husband, and as I started reading it to him, he started yawning. And I was like, something's missing. I guess I better he better have a sister. I better learn to write dialogue. And so I learned to write dialogue, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Well, this is a perfect segue because you were just mentioning two of the most important characters in the story, Ada and Homer. So what inspired the development of your characters? They're so vivid, and it's so easy for the reader to fall in love with them and to hope for them. Are any of them based on people from history or from your own life, or are they wholly made up?
That's such a great question. So for the most part, they're made up, and they are pieces. I always say they're kind of like pieces of a puzzle, like a puzzle of me, maybe, I don't know. But so Homer himself, I love the idea of trying to figure out what kind of consciousness does an enslaved child have? How do you survive that? Because we don't talk about the kids of enslavement that much, even though the vast majority who were enslaved started out as children. They were born into it. I mean, there were very few beyond those that first came that, they were born into it, and they lived their lives from childhood straight to death in that. And so how do you paint different aspects? And just as how each child is sitting here, each one of you is different. It has your own little personalities. You might be outgoing, you might be shy, you might be. The kids that were born enslaved were equally different. And how do we find a way to take this terrible system and yet still find kids in that system? It's something that's full of inhumanity, but find the humanity of the people that survived it. And so that was the challenge. And so Homer was just like, how would he survive? He would want to make himself invisible. So he decides that, I'm going to make myself, like, that's my superpower. I'm going to pretend like I can become invisible. And because once you're invisible within this system, you can survive. And so he's a wonderful survivor and very pragmatic. And Ada, how does she survive? I'm like, how would another, even smaller child survive? She lives in her own dream world. She sees monsters, she sees angels, she's able to sort of see above. She like lives above this system in a way. And so I see them. Now, are any of the characters based on real things? When I was in 5th grade, I went to school with a kid that was just like Ferdinand, and he is absolutely based on that child. So, oh my God, this mischievous, sort of picking on you, sort of making fun of you, sort of. I can see him, I see his face, I see his smile. It's so imagine if you, a 5th grader, decided to write a book when you're an adult and you wrote about somebody you're friends with now. That is Ferdinand. Yeah.
That's so cool. So back on the character thread, your story is kind of unique in that you have a lot of characters and they all kind of act as narrators of different parts of the story. So what was it like trying to keep track of all of them through the writing process and their storylines?
Oh, that's a great question as well. Oh my goodness, there are a lot of characters, and I hadn't realized that. It took a while. For a person who was afraid to write dialogue, to then having a book that someone would say, oh, there's so many characters, I cannot believe that I got to that point, because I was afraid to make characters to start with. This book is a labor of love. So imagine I had a certain number of characters, very few. My original thought for this book was that it would be the size of, do you guys know those books, the tree house,
Magic Tree House.
Magic Tree House. Because we were reading those. So that was what Freewater was going to be. I was like, I could write that book. I could write something that big. Just enough. And so that was where we were going to go with this. And once I started writing, I was like, wow, but I really want more complexity. I wanted more. And so I couldn't help myself but wanted to pull more and more into it. And so more and more characters came out of that. And I would just layer in as I would rewrite the whole story again. Like I rewrote and I put Ada in. I would rewrite and I would put Ferdinand in, and I would rewrite the whole story again and I put another character in, and the story grew and grew. So keeping track of them at first wasn't hard, but by the end, I literally had like a spreadsheet and I had to do like a roll call. I'm like, Billy, are you here? Ada, have you made it across the bridge? Check. And so I was like, where's Mrs. Light? Is she okay? Check. And so I really had to do like, everybody say present if you are safe in Freewater. Or not.
Right.
Yeah, it was tricky.
So do you have a favorite character? And if you do, was that your favorite character at the beginning of writing and also still at the end of writing?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, okay. So I always say I don't have a favorite character, but I have to say Freewater has become such a big part of my imagination that I can go there. I can take my mind there. When I'm stressed, I can go there. And the person I always visit when I end up going is Sansi. So I guess that means that she's my favorite character. Now, Sansi, for those of y'all who might have not read the book, she was born and raised in Freewater and has this crazy idea, as an adventurer that she is, that she just always wants to get out of Freewater. She wants to go on adventures. And doesn't really understand that that's not a good idea. This is not a good idea. And so she's always up to mischief. And so my husband claims that she is very much like me.
Oh.
I don't see it.
Robert's back there in the corner. Wave, Robert. Say hi.
So he's like, he's always like, she's you. Come on. And I'm like, she's not me. I was a rule follower. And so, but yeah. So there's her, and at the beginning of it, I love all the characters for different, because they're all different aspects of me. And so I wish that I could see the world as Ada. I wish that my heart could be as big as Billy. I wish that, I could be as wise as Mrs. Light. All those things are true.
Yeah. So not a person character, but the bridge did play a really important role in the story of Freewater. How did you write the details of the bridge?
Oh, that's a great question. The bridge, I have to say that this story became Freewater when I put the bridge in. Freewater has many aspects of the story that are based on real things, which is really cool. Like the tree people, or this you'll read things that don't seem true, but I'm like, no, tree people, those they in Jamaica, they were an essential part of survival of maroon communities in Jamaica. They festoon themselves in foliage in order to survive. But the bridge is part of my own imagination. And I don't know, you all do you go to the folk festivals each year? I love going to the Smithsonian Folk Festival. And one year it was based on Peru, and the Peruvian folks came over, and they were literally building a bridge in front of us. Like, they showed how they did it, and I never forget it. It was very much based on that look, because there they have these almost sky bridges in the mountainous areas. And so I remember thinking, what if I include a sky bridge here? Because that, even though you can technically walk from a plantation and find your way to, or at least swim or whatever, to Freewater, that disconnection of the mind, of your consciousness, of that the sort of the weight of the plantation can be released as you go across this bridge. So it feels magical by the time you get to the other end of that bridge. You feel like you've gone to another place. And what you've really done is just, traverse this bridge. And so that was a really wonderful thing for me to do, because once I could mentally get rid of putting the plantation as the center in my mind, I was able to really focus in and dig deep on what Freewater was. So it was helpful to me, and I think it's helpful for the reader too, because you're able to free your mind and just hear the children, hear the kids like getting into trouble, being kids, doing what they do, and without feeling that they might be victimized at any moment. Freewater is not free of danger, but it is free of that sense of victimization.
Okay, let's talk about the cover of the book for a second. Do you guys all know that this is Amina's debut novel? First book she ever wrote of this type. It won both the Newbery and the Coretta Scott King, and I had to ask her, when you win the Newbery, do you get a trophy? And what did you tell me?
Oh, no, the Newbery medal is an actual medal.
I had no idea.
Did y'all know this? I did not know this until I got the medal. So they were like, it is an actual medal that looks just like this, except right in this tiny area here, they inscribed my name. And so it's at my house. I could have bought it. I didn't think of it, because usually I'm flying other places to go visit schools or whatnot, but we just drove here on Broad Street. I could have brought it, but no, anyway, it's in a little container in my house with a nice little, it's beautiful.
So let's talk about the portrait on the cover.
Yeah.
It's unusual that a cover would be just the portrait of a character. Yeah. What was your role in deciding on this for the cover of Freewater? What do you think about it? Is there any special meaning in it?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so I love this cover, but I had nothing to do with it. Zero. No, in that they put this, the artist who did this. I should first let me prop up the artist. Her name is Cosby Cabrera. She is an amazing artist who's done other sort of Caldecott honorary type work, and so she's big time. And she conceived of it, and we got to sort of look at sketches of it and give her feedback. But I never met Cosby Cabrera until the day I was presented with the Newbery Medal. Like, that was the first time we actually saw each other. I hugged her, said, thank you. This is how I picture Homer now. Before this, there was no Homer, And so they keep a firewall between the writers and the artists, and that makes sense now, because what if you don't like it? If something goes wrong, then you don't have two artists sort of duking it out. And so I just knew that I felt like she had captured it. I love the sort of electric green around his face. I love his eyes. I love it.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit about the time you've spent in the Dismal Swamp, and if you've been near the Smithsonian site or where Freewater might have actually been.
Okay, so I did go to the Great Dismal Swamp, and I did want to go into the sort of the area that has been is known as sort of the site where Maroons would have lived, but it is not accessible. It's not easily accessible, I should say. So the person who runs that site is a professor right here in this area at American University called Daniel Sayers. And Dr. Sayers was like, well, if you're going to the Great Dismal, because I went to him, I talked to him, he looks sort of like Indiana Jones. He has like a hat. He's an archaeologist. He's like, you're going in there, you want to make sure you watch out for snakes. And I was like, oh dear, I don't like snakes. He was like, no, really, it's like, just be careful. And so he runs these things, and it takes a long time for his students to trek through the mud and through the muck to get to that site. But visiting, you do get to have these cool experiences. So I took my husband and my son, and we went out there, and we got to just get a sense of sort of the look, the smell, the feel, the trees. I mean, if you've read the book, Suleiman lives in this tree cave, and I remember seeing a tree that was very large, and it had this big cutout in it, and it looked as though, oh wow, you could probably get in there and like hide in the tree, and those things really sparked my imagination. And as I was there, I was able to do a special tour that talked about how people would have survived there, like what foods are there, what animals are there, things like that. And so that was great, like wild ginger and wild herbs, wild garlic, things like that you could find. And I just grabbed all those things, every little bit, and I put it right into the book.
Excellent. So is there a question about Freewater that you wish someone would ask you that they haven't asked yet?
I've never been asked that question. No, I mean, people are really, really wonderfully inquisitive and thoughtful. No, I think the one thing I would talk about is that I don't talk about enough, I think, is just in writing it, I wanted for people to have this like visceral connection with this, and I wanted people to have the opposite of what we generally get is like a bunch of facts, like, okay, well, this happened, and these are the atrocities that happened, and I want, those are good, facts are good, don't get me wrong, we need to live on facts, but that narrative, that visceral connection that you have with a character, that you have with their experience, that you have, that is what lasts a lifetime. And I really, I mean, when I don't know about you guys, as a kid, I was an avid reader, and so I have certain characters that I still, to this day, adore. Like, even this morning, I was listening to a little bit of audio Anne of Green Gables, which, I'm sorry, I know it's super corny, but I do listen to it sometimes because she's like an old friend. Like, I thought, what if you could have a character to, like, from that time, an enslaved character, someone formerly enslaved even, that you could have a connection with like that you would just want to carry around with you and be like, oh yeah, I totally know that character, and I totally, and you wouldn't take only the pain, but you take them with you.
So is there something that you hope that readers will take away from their reading of Freewater besides that connection to a character, besides knowing that the facts that you're taught about slavery, but also that there was a whole nother
the humanity of it,
humanity that existed that we don't always know about.
Yeah, because it is a very inhumane system, and I think it is hard sometimes to see, ironically, the humanity within this humane system. I have studied, because of this, it's made me study more and more about the system of enslavement, and it is worse than I could have imagined. This is what made it to the book. This is what made it to paper. Imagine what didn't, And so I definitely want people to get to a point where I did. For me, like I said, I came from a spot of fear and guilt about that fear, and shame about that guilt about that fear. And so by the time imagine, like, when I started this book, I remember going to a plantation, and I got there, and I remember feeling as though I would I couldn't enter the house. Like, that's how, I couldn't even go in. I had to leave. And feeling just so afraid and so just feeling only pain. And so we leave. And so I start reading more and more, and I start writing more and more. And that writing really did help heal me. So by the next time I went back to a plantation, I had like Homer on one shoulder, I had Suleiman on the other, and I walked in there and I was able to see it more clearly. I was able to, like, it removed all of the boundaries and all of the bricks and mortar that were placed around the people, and I could see people surviving in this system, finding ways, and not just see the ways in which they were victimized. And so I hope that people have a similar reaction when they read it, in that they can go to a different place, a healing place.
Yeah. I hope that's true too. So we're going to leave Freewater for a second.
Okay.
Hopefully the kids will have some questions, or adults, about Freewater. But let's just talk about your future work.
Ooh.
How does it feel, first of all, to receive all this acclaim for a debut novel?
It's
a debut experience.
You know, I've been so lucky and so spoiled, I hate to say this in a way, by this. I meet authors that have struggled to get to these points, and I feel this sense of great guilt. I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't know. But on the other side of that great privilege is this like feeling of like, oh my God, you're a writer. Like, I wrote one book. I'm like, so people say, oh, you're a writer. I'm like, well, I guess I am. My agent's like, yes, you are. Get to work. And I'm like, I guess I'm a writer. And so it feels scary, to be honest, to endeavor to do more after you've done this. I did this. I was talking to Carlin a little bit about this. I was like, I'm a perfectionist, I think. That's just who I am. And it's not a great thing to be that, but I started writing this book, Freewater, in absolute secrecy. No one knew I was working on this for years. My family were very close, but none of them knew, only my husband, and he was sworn to secrecy. And so I wrote this book outside of that perfectionist realm. I wrote it when I was just sort of like, oh, look, I wrote some dialogue, and it's correctly punctuated. And so, like, I would give myself these pats on the back, like, oh, I came up with another character, woo! And no one knew about it. So now, when there is expectation and there is this feeling of like, what now? And I'm like, oh God, how do I, it sort of moves me from that realm, that quiet realm of mistake making, to like, now I have to be, now it's more public, and trying to figure out how do I grow and make it so I can be imperfect in public.
A challenge, for sure.
Apparently.
But you seem up to it.
I'm trying to be.
So you told me in the green space that you had started your next project.
Oh yeah, I am, shall we say, waist deep in my next project. And yeah, go ahead.
I don't want you to say too much about it, but are you continuing in the same vein of historical fiction about a topic that is kind of not known to most people? I'm trying.
Definitely, I feel like I have more to say in the historical world. I think there's more that needs to be said. And my goal is to take a character. I'll tell you now, I'm trying to take Anna, and I'm trying to follow her, and to see what happens to her when she leaves the plantation. And I'm trying to introduce another bit of interesting history that a lot of folks might not know of, and introduce a whole new cast of characters interacting with that history in new ways. And it's a lot. I think, I was like, dude, I should have just written a sequel to Freewater. What was I thinking? But here I am.
Yeah, here you are. And we'll look forward to reading that for sure.
Me too.
For the kids here, is that book also going to be in the YA space.
It's gonna, yeah. I love this. I don't know about you guys. At least for me, this middle grade area or middle grade YA. This is my favorite time to read. This is when I was the most enthusiastic about reading. It is a glorious time. I hope you all have that feeling as well. Just glorious time before college sort of stamps it out of you. but it's really wonderful. So yeah, I definitely want kids to be in this space.
Excellent. So now I think we've reached a time when we can take questions from some of our audience members, and I love it. We've got an enthusiastic hand right here in the front.
I would ask you if the kids would all walk around the back and come in the center aisle so that we'll have a line, because we're going to have Shelley's going to come over and be the microphone holder.
Oh.
So anybody that wants to ask a question, just go around the back and come up the center aisle. Thank you.
Are we okay on time?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Right on. No, we're right on time. I should try this out.
Oh, so we're doing perfectly.
Because you didn't tell
not
me
bad.
and we started late, so I think we're doing great. Some water?
Oh.
Hello. Hello.
Hi.
My name's Alice, and I'm wondering, how did you begin writing exactly?
Oh, thank you for that question, Alice. I appreciate it. You know what? I sat down and to be honest, I was a little afraid to write, so I made it in a dark space for myself where I almost couldn't even see myself. And I just thought, where would I want to be? Like, I try to picture that first scene, like, where am I? And I would try to picture, like, what did it smell like? What did it sound like? What did it feel like? And then I would just write a few words about that in a way, right? And then I like adventure, and so I always knew, I'm like, if I could write a whole chapter, it better end in a cliffhanger by the end. And so that was always where I was headed. I'm like, okay, I see this space. What crazy thing can happen to make it so by the end of the chapter, you're like, I gotta go to the next chapter. That's what I did.
Also, I was also wondering, did you get rid of any characters when you were writing the book?
Oh, great question. I did. In fact, I kept, in fact,
Can I repeat the question real quick?
Sure.
The question she asked was, did she get rid of any characters in the book?
I did. An example of one, I'll be honest, is that, I don't know if you've read it, but Nora, she's one of the main characters. She's on the plantation. Nora had a brother. And yeah, I know. And so, and he had a big role. He was in like the first, 15 drafts. I really took him out quite late, and I had to just weave him out, only because it was sort of tilting the focus of the book a little bit away from Freewater. Like I called the book Freewater for a reason. So I was like, if I'm putting on too many storylines, because anytime you introduce a character, you want to make sure they have a full arc, right? A beginning, a middle, and end. And so I was like, if he gets a beginning, middle, and end, he's taking a little bit away from Nora's, her beginning, middle, and end, and then he's taking they're both then going to take a little bit away from Freewater, and so I ended up sadly having to cut him. And I had to merge a couple of characters. And so, yeah, which is tricky. Yeah. so like Billy's father and another character who was sort of a leader in Freewater had to be merged into just Billy's father, I know. And there were a few, and I had an agent an editor that wanted me to get rid of more characters, but I was very territorial about my characters. I was like, I know there are a lot of them, but kids are smart, they'll keep up. And so I kept most. Thank you, great question.
That was really interesting.
Oh, you do? Please, thank you for telling me that. You know how much courage it takes to say that? I'm so glad you told me. And you know what? I'll give you my best advice. well, I was given this advice: writers write. And so if you want to be a writer, just keep it writing. And if you're willing to just keep saying it and keep trying to say it again and keep trying to say it again, you will literally write yourself into being a writer. I assure you that. All right? Good for you. Thank you.
Hello.
Hey.
My name's Chris.
Hi,
this
Chris.
isn't really related to Freewater, but I was wondering, what's your opinion on Huckleberry Finn?
My opinion on?
Like, what do you think of this story? What do you think of Mark Twain and his...
Oh, Huckleberry Finn. Oh, I didn't hear
Sorry.
Huckleberry Finn. Oh, okay, good question. I think that, and now Mark Twain was he's a classical writer, ingenious in his writing in many ways. I'm not an anti-Mark Twain person. I do think, though, it is time for some of those classical stories to be seen differently, written differently, revisited. And I like the idea, like we have James that came out. I like the idea that people are sort of saying, okay, well, this was their take at that time. Here's another take. So then you can, as a human, as a person, see the arc and say, well, this is where we were, this is where we are. Here's our next commentary on it. I don't think it needs to doesn't have to disappear, but no, it doesn't need to be at the center, I think, of children's lit right now, because there's more to think of. And so, in fact, you could argue that a book like Freewater is in some ways trying to create that new space. And so, yeah, so I'm not totally anti Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn type stuff, but I do see growth, need for growth. Thank you for asking. Great question. Very insightful. All right, you guys.
My name's Bryn, and I was wondering if, would you maybe ever write an autobiography about yourself?
Oh, whoa! So say you want to know if I would write an autobiography about myself? Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. Wow. I'll be honest. Back in the day, when I first started thinking about writing Freewater, I was writing down a number of book ideas, and my mom came to me and says, "Amina, we have a very interesting family. You should write a book about our family." I was like, okay. And when your mom asked you to, I was like, well, and I tried actually to write a book about our family. It was a picture book. And at that time, I think in part because it was an assignment, it didn't really take off for me. Like it didn't land for me. I was like, even if it is an interesting story. So no, I did try something where I sort of put myself in the center, autobiographical. Now I feel like my life is so just beginning, and so I don't feel like I have enough to say yet. And so maybe one day when I'm like even older, I know you're like, you're already old, what do you mean? But when I'm even older, maybe I'll have more to say. I don't know. I feel like I'm just learning. I'm one book in. Thank you. Great question. Great. Another never heard question. Thanks, you guys.
So I have two questions. My first one is, you said you had many different drafts and that you changed a lot about the characters in those drafts. Did you change anything about the actual story itself?
Oh, yes. Oh my goodness gracious. In fact, I changed the story so much. My husband's here and he'll tell you, he's like, I know you won award for that book. He's like, but the best draft is still on the floor. He's like, it wasn't published. He's very clear. And so yeah, he's like, his favorite draft is, he wants to speak on his draft. Go ahead, tell us what you think. Thank you, Robert. Ooh, indeed. Oh yeah. that was the draft, and it was I wrote the whole story. I mean, from beginning, middle, end, everything. It's its own book. It's in my attic, but exactly. But when I had it read by a family friend, that draft. And he finished it and he goes, oh, I loved it. He's like, that is a beautiful love story. And I was like, Nope. I missed my target, and I put it aside, and I've never read it again since, and I started a new draft. I'm like, I missed it. This is for kids, this is excitement, this is adventure. This is not a love story. I don't care how well I did it. So I let it go. Great question.
Also, what made you come up, what was your inspiration for the names of the characters?
Great question. Okay, so depending on the character, so Homer I thought was a great name because he's constantly sort of looking at home and understanding what that means. So he gets the Freewater, and that should be his new home, and it kind of is, but he's still searching for home because his mom isn't there. If his mom isn't there, it's not feeling like home. And so I felt like that was a cool thing because he had this sort of life story that kind of revolved around that. Ada just happens to be like a familial name. Like my husband, it's an ancestral name in his family. My husband's family runs all the way, he can trace it all the way back from enslavement, all the way through every war, all the way up until now. And so really cool name. But other names I thought were cool, like Two Shoes. Two Shoes got his name because of the type of character he is and his two sides of himself, very much so. And so the side that is doing anything he can to survive, and the side that sort of understands what freedom is in Freewater, and he wishes that could be, but he's willing to maybe risk destroying all of that for his love for his family. So that two sides of him was there. And Suleiman, I just love that name. And I kind of did have a crush on a guy when I was a kid whose name was Suleiman. So yeah, it's fabulous. Awesome name. So anyway, but no, it's a great question. Thank you. Did you have, I thought you had a follow-up.
She doesn't want to read it, so we're here together.
Thank you for coming together.
Do you have any tips for a story? She's writing one and she doesn't know how to continue. The plot kind of ran dry.
Oh, that is really cool. I'm so glad. Oh, there's nothing better than the person who's a writer with problems. Oh God, I feel connected to you like right now in this very special way. What do you do when you run out of things? I'm trying to think when I've run out of things. I think that sometimes it takes stepping back, reading what you have. Just go back and see what you have. And then allow yourself to think of like the wildest thing. Be like, what if something crazy happened right now? And what'll happen is you might write a little bit about that wild thing and think, oh, that's the path I should be on. Or it'll occur to you that, no, this isn't where I want to be. Because sometimes writing a draft helps you know where you don't want to be. And so keep writing and allow yourself to write something bad. Allow yourself to write something that is not working, to then allow you to go back and say, okay, this didn't work. But your brain is such that when you get into that place where something isn't working, your brain's going to want to try to go someplace where it does work. And so never fret. That means you're a real writer. If you're there in the trenches with me right now and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm stuck, I'm dry. That means you are on the wonderful road of becoming a writer. And I much respect that. And that you even asked that question is much respect. Thank you.
Is there any other kids who want to ask a question? I can come to you if you want to.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Oh. Zach is my son. He is. My son? No. But he is, but I'll be honest, that I dedicated this to Zach, my son, and it is not only dedicated to him, but as I wrote it, it is literally tuned. It's like a violin, like tuned to his sensibilities, to his, as I read it, he was my sort of compass to be like, well, is he gonna get bored here? He probably get bored. He's a real tough critic. My son is, anything he reads, he's like, no, bah. He's like, first book was good, second, third, and fourth book, bah. And I'm like, I'm like, you're so hard on authors. He's so hard on them. He is. He's so hard. Oh my God. And so I constantly was trying to think of what would he think, how would he think of it, and what would he say, and would I lose him? Am I going to lose him? And he liked big, complex stories, and so that's how you ended up with this. But it's very much dedicated. Not just dedicated, it was written with him in mind.
So yeah, we're going to open it up now to adults. So I'm going to run around now, Jenny. Here you go.
Hi, my name is Jenny, and so I just want to start by saying my favorite character is Ada, because I love the way she lives, as you say, from above. But I'm intrigued by your decision to put Nora in the book, to have a person who's part of this enslavers, that community, who is marginalized and doesn't feel part of that community, feels kind of like she's living in a liminal space between the two. And I just would like to hear about your decision to have her as a character and a focus.
Well, I thank you. I like how you explain her. Yeah, her living in this liminal space. I think that's really a thoughtful approach. I went back and forth a lot on Nora and what role she would play and how large that role should be. And it was, one is because I always wanted to make sure the voices of enslaved folks stayed at the center. But by the time, as I was writing it, I thought, because I wrote a draft where I didn't have a Nora, and then I wrote another draft where I put her back in a different way. And I did so because I feel like for children who read this book, they need to understand that there is no one that is born knowing how to enslave someone. No one. There's no one knowing how to be enslaved. These are learned behaviors, and they are learned from societal structures and things like that. We're taught them. Her mother tries to teach her. I mean, we see these things. And I wanted, at the end of it, for kids to understand that these are things that not only are learned, but they can be unlearned. You can find your voice. You can find ways to push against that system. And that even kids have a way where they can step apart. And she's lucky in that she looks a little different. She actually is colored. I mean, it's very, ironically paradoxical. Like, she is colored in a way that allows her to see the world a little bit more clearly, a little bit more. And so, but for a kid to read it and say, you know what, sometimes I feel on the outside a little bit of whatever world I'm in, and I should trust my instinct to be able to critique that world, and trust it to be able to say, oh no, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that, and that's okay, and that there's some power in that. And so if it were an adult book, I probably wouldn't have had a Nora, because adults, I don't think you need to have, I mean, there's a history of books where you have white characters that kind of tell the story of victimized people. And I didn't want that as well. So that was always in my mind. I was like, I don't want her to carry the story. She can't be that person. But I thought it was important to have her there so that kids can understand that there's always hope. There's always hope. And she is, and there are always choices that people can make. And you can find your voice, literally. Thanks.
Hi there, my name is Megan. I listened to the audiobook and loved the narrator, so kudos to whoever produced that.
Yeah.
Is there any talk of doing a movie?
Oh, that's a great question as well. Yeah, I do have a dramatic rights agent who's out farming it around in Hollywood and trying to see if we can get a production company to bite. We haven't gotten any bites yet. I mean, it's a hard process, and so I do hope, that one day we'll be able to do that. But as soon as my agent read it, and then other dramatic rights folks read it, they were like, oh, we see a thread for something dramatic, something cinematic here. And so hopefully one day it'll be that. Thank you. I always say that I do these things because I'm always looking for my foot soldiers. And you telling another person, you gifting this book to another person, eventually it will end up in the right hands. And the book will speak for itself. The book will tell you, will tell whomever's doing it. And I always say this, that I can't, even though I have this agent, don't tell him I said this. You can't, because he wouldn't agree. I'm like, there is no way you're going to sell anybody on this book. There's no way that you're going to go and convince somebody that this is the book. Whoever does a movie about this book will have to feel called to do so. They will have to feel like this is something they have to do, because it's that kind of story. It's not like, oh, well, let me picture it. No, they're going to have maybe a kid, like, I read this book, I really love it, read this book. Or they're going to have to get it from some personal place, I think. I don't think it's going to be because we pitched it amazingly well, even though it's, it's pitchable. Hi. Hello.
Yes, Shelley, I'm not being stubborn. I do not need a microphone.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm Avery, and for those of you who don't know, I am the church librarian.
Oh, sweet.
So
I love librarians. We need you. Thank you.
Pardon? I'm sorry. I would like to know what the word Freewater means to you.
Excellent. Wow. Okay. Well, that name is interesting because I came up with the name of Freewater as soon as I knew that this book was going to be inspired by the Great Dismal Swamp. I used to just call it the Maroon Book. For like draft after draft, it was called my Maroon Book. And then when I discovered the Dismal Swamp and this idea that there's this place that was considered just one of the most inhospitable places you could live, one of the most treacherous places. That Dismal did not come easy. That name was there for a reason. And I'm like, wow, what if we could turn that on its head and we could have that water in those places be free? And I was like, oh, Freewater, that's a great name. And I'm lucky because usually by the time it goes through all the marketing and all that stuff, just like with the book cover, they'll have changed the name and done it. Nope, they never have changed it. There was never discussion about whether or not it should be that. But for me, it definitely meant if in case you wondered where you're going to be, because these books about this time period can, really focus on the harshness of the system. No, you're going to be in free water here. You're going to be in a free space, and we're going to find a way to talk about this topic within that space.
Can I make another comment?
Please.
And I'm not using the mic, Shelley. Having not read the book yet, I came approaching it from two angles. This talk, listening to you.
Okay.
And one is Freewater was a between place. It wasn't an unhappy place, and it wasn't a happy place. It was a place to come together. The other one was I was thinking of free, and I was thinking of water. And one of the challenges that racists have had to coming together is the business of water fountains.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Where you have
Yeah, segregated. Yeah.
and you have white water fountains.
Yeah.
And the way water's going now, damn it, you better hope to get them all together no matter what.
I hear you. I just so you know, I think it's okay to me when you say, oh, it seems like a middle space. I think Freewater and the concept of maroons is meant to gray the space that is freedom, south, north is free, south is not. It's actually meant to gray some of the lines. So maroons sort of like, oh, well, you have this pocket of freedom in the middle, of this. Oh, wait, so it makes you, as soon as you start graying the lines on this history, that's where you see the humanity. That's where you see, people are always fighting. People are always fighting to find every little way to find freedom within that system. And so I like that, the idea of I'm sorry, I'm running on, but yes, of that gray space.
I just want to say on behalf of fourth grade teachers in Virginia everywhere, thank you for including the Great Dismal Swamp, because it's one of our Virginia standards we have to teach, the Great Dismal Swamp.
Sweet, sweet.
So thank you.
That's totally a coincidence, so yes. That's great.
We have the wonderful problem of having to cut off questions because we have to sort of stay with our schedule. I want to introduce Yana Wang, who is our new senior pastor of our church, and I just want you all to meet her and have her a chance to talk to you. Yana.
Woo.
Well, hello, friends and neighbors. What a great afternoon to be together. I'm Yana Huang. I'm the new senior pastor here at Falls Church Presbyterian Church. I am so blessed and lucky to be here because this church is amazing. And I want to thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us today to brighten the days that have been not so bright. And, you know, it is my great joy to be able to welcome all of you into this space because I think events like Crooked Steeple Literary Festival is a gathering where we are reminded that words have power. Words have power to open our hearts, challenge our minds, and bring us a little bit closer to the truth and to one another. At Falls Church Presbyterian, we believe that faith and storytelling go hand in hand. The stories we tell, the books we read, and the conversations that we engage in help shape our understanding of the world and the call to live with integrity, no matter what your faith background may be. And some of the most important stories are the ones that ask us to confront difficult truths about our history, about justice, about the ways we have fallen short, and the ways we can do better. Or as Amina has reminded us, find humanity in inhumane system. So, I am so happy that our church in also receiving help from our governing body called the National Capital Presbytery and our leaders, that we are able to put such event as this. And I want to invite you to consider supporting events like this so that we can continue to hold these kinds of space and conversations to flourish. Your generosity helps us to continue to foster meaningful conversations, provide educational programming, and support initiatives that uplift justice, truth, and community engagement. You can give online or in person, and if you look in the back, we have a table with special cards made by our associate pastor, Reverend Megan Close. It's amazing. I want you to go take a look at it, even if you don't buy it, because it just is amazing. And also, you know that you can buy a copy if you do not have a copy in Bard's Alley Library or bookstore is back there, and our author will be seated in the back later on to sign your books as well. So, I thank you for being here. I ask you to continue to engage one another in deep, meaningful conversation so that we can continue to live out our faith and our calling, whatever that may be. Blessings to you.
If you bought your book ahead of time, you can line up. Amina will be at the book signing table on that side. You can line up to get her to sign your book for you. If you want to buy a book, then you need to go first to the table where Amy is and purchase a copy. And The refreshments for today were specifically selected for kids, but adults are allowed to have some of the food. So we have hot chocolate and other things for you to eat. So please, while you're waiting in line, you can get some food. Finally, I just want to tell you that please make a note on your calendar that our next festival event is April the 26th, and Catherine Ray will be with us to read from her Cold War-era novel, The Berlin Letters. It tells the fictional story of a family just before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it goes back and forth in time between then and now, and it tells some of the fascinating secrets of the women coders who risk their lives. So, blessings to each of you. Please join me once again in thanking Amina Luqman-Dawson.